Hey guys, tonight we are plunging headfirst into a war started over a pastry. That's right, a war, cannons, blood, dead guys, over dessert. You might be thinking, surely that's a metaphor. It is not. It is 1838 and a French pastry chef in Mexico City gets mildly inconvenienced. And France responds by bombarding a coastline and blocking Mexican ports like a sulking teen on social media. There are powdered wigs. There are amputations. There's at least one diplomatic letter that reads like a bad Yelp review with bullets attached. You're probably not surviving this. Not because it's especially dangerous, it's just that everyone involved is too stupid to keep you alive. You might get caught in crossfire. You might trip over a sabotaged churro cart. Or you might simply die of embarrassment when you realize how real this all is. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Post your location and local time in the comments so I know who's going to bed smarter or dumber tonight. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are a French pastry chef, and not even a fancy one. You bake tarts and eclairs for the bourgeois diplomats and sweaty military officers who strut around Mexico City pretending it's a salon in Paris. You're not well connected, you're not important, but your damn pastries are legendary. The kind of sugar-drizzled perfection that makes people weep, cheat, and forget revolutions. And then, one hot afternoon in 1832, yes, we're 6 years before the actual war. Because absurdity takes time to rise like dough, your bakery gets wrecked. Mexican officers stumble in, drunk, looking for snacks and somewhere to pee. They steal chairs, break dishes, and shatter your windows with a saber because apparently that's a power move now. One officer eats a mille-feuille, declares it mid, and throws it at a painting of Napoleon. You file a complaint, you write letters, you beg the Mexican government to pay for the damages, only 600 pesos, which is a lot, but you are French, and the chandelier alone cost at least half that. No one listens. Weeks pass, then months, then years. You start putting passive-aggressive signs in the bakery window, "We would serve you." But the Mexican army still owes us money. Then it gets funnier. You escalate your complaint to the French embassy. Because if there's one thing 19th century France loves, it's getting offended on behalf of obscure expatriates. The embassy politely pretends to care. Nothing happens. You keep baking, you become bitter, then bored, then revolutionary. By 1837, someone in the French Ministry of the Navy finally reads your letter, and somehow, in an opium haze of bureaucracy and boredom, they decide this is the hill they want to die on. We must defend the dignity of our citizens. A naval attaché yells while buttering toast with a knife the size of a harpoon. And just like that, the complaint goes from a soggy bakery invoice to a diplomatic incident. France decides that Mexico must pay not just your 600 pesos, but 600,000. You blink, you reread, you ask, wait, did they add 3 zeros? They did, because the price of justice includes interest, insult, and inexplicable inflation. Now, here's your first verified historical fact. France actually did demand 600,000 pesos in reparations, a sum that included multiple claims, but yes, your bakery was explicitly mentioned in the final list. Your humble pastry shop became the metaphorical match in a powder keg of preposterous foreign policy. Bizarre trivia nugget. One of the Mexican officers responsible for the original bakery incident was never officially named, but some reports just refer to him as the Hungry Colonel. That's not a joke. That's the guy who lit the fuse of a war, an unnamed man with poor self-control and a need for flaky crusts. Meanwhile, Mexico rolls its collective eyes. President Anastasio Bustamante has already got rebellions, tax revolts, church problems, and every kind of coup short of a literal chicken one. A pastry dispute. He's not even reading those memos. They go straight into the deal with later or never pile, which is taller than a cathedral and probably on fire. Historians still argue whether France genuinely cared about your tart or just used it as a convenient excuse to mess with Mexico while flexing its navy. Some say it was about enforcing respect for French citizens abroad. Others say it was a blatant act of gunboat diplomacy wrapped in creme pâtissière. You just wanted your window replaced. Maybe a thank you note, maybe a bronze plaque that says, "Here once stood the tart that started a war." Instead, you've become a diplomatic flashpoint. Mexican newspapers begin mocking you. Le Petit Chef demands blood for bread. French papers print exaggerated drawings of your bakery as a crumbled Gothic ruin. Your broken tart looking like a murdered child in powdered sugar. But back in Mexico City, you go back to baking. You try to ignore the building chaos. You keep your head down until one day, a kid runs into your shop and shouts, "The French are coming!" You freeze mid-ganache because the year is now 1838 and France has sent ships. Like actual warships, cannons, flags, officers in blue. Admiral Charles Bowden shows up with 26 ships off the coast of Veracruz and delivers an ultimatum. Pay up in 24 hours or we blow up your port. You drop your spatula. This escalated quickly. Your name, Joseph Remontel. You, a pastry chef with chronic heartburn and strong opinions on apricot glaze, are now why France is going to war with Mexico. You think, maybe I should write a second letter. You watch from afar as the diplomatic baguette slaps begin. It's November 1838 and Veracruz, Mexico's bustling. Salt-crusted port city is nervously chewing its lip as French warships glimmer on the horizon. Admiral Baudin is out there, lounging on the deck of his flagship La Hermione, sipping something pompous and telling himself he's about to rewrite colonial history with pastry vengeance. The ultimatum is laughably pompous. France demands 600,000 pesos, roughly Mexico's annual military budget for damage claims from various French citizens, including you, the sad baker with the shattered window and the trauma of a flung mille-feuille. They even threw in a few other complaints, just to make the whole thing feel more respectable. A broken chair, some looted shops, an unpaid furniture invoice from 1828, and something about a French hairdresser whose salon was ransacked after a particularly bad perm. Mexico says absolutely not in about 8 different ways, ranging from formal rejections to unsubtle coughs of chinga tu madre during cabinet meetings. And so, France has a meltdown. You imagine the scene in Paris, powdered wigs being tossed, ministers clutching lace doilies, men named Gaston yelling things like, "We shall not suffer indignities over plates of cheese." King Louis Philippe, the citizen king, who rose to power pretending to be all about peace and progress, decides this is the perfect moment to wave his baguette-shaped saber of imperial authority. He greenlights the naval operation. Bowden gets orders. The pastry must be avenged. Here's your next verified historical fact. King Louis Philippe personally authorized the fleet blockade and use of force, marking this as one of the earliest examples of modern gunboat diplomacy. The idea being, we'd like to have a polite conversation, but we brought 300 cannons just in case. And those cannons, they're loaded with more than gunpowder. They're loaded with centuries of European entitlement, a deeply confused sense of justice, and probably at least one backup copy of the bakery invoice, laminated for durability. Back in Mexico, you, Joseph Remontel, have no idea how big this thing's become. You're still baking, you're stressed. Of course, you've been warned not to leave the city, but the soufflés aren't going to whip themselves. Still, your name starts floating around like a ghost in foreign ministry meetings. Journalists refer to you only as the pastry man. You begin to fantasize about going back to France and opening a shop called La Guerre du Gâteau. Meanwhile, France assembles its list of demands like a kid playing tyrant during recess. 600,000 pesos in silver. An apology from the Mexican government. Preferential trade terms for French merchants. A statue of Admiral Bowden made entirely of marzipan, okay? That one's probably just a rumor. Mexico counters with its own list. No. Still no. Please leave. But Bowden isn't here to negotiate. He's here to theatrically threaten. You watch the blockade unfold like an over-budget stage play. French warships surround Veracruz. No ships allowed in. No ships allowed out. French Marines begin practicing calisthenics on the deck, shirtless and dramatic. And here comes your bizarre trivia nugget. One of Bowden's lieutenants insisted on playing opera arias from a phonograph toward the shore as part of psychological warfare. It had no tactical effect, but it did confuse the hell out of Veracruz fishermen, who reportedly thought the French were summoning Poseidon. Things are tense. Mexico sends more letters. France refuses to read them unless they're sealed with imported wax. Veracruz starts rationing rum. One Mexican officer describes the mood as like a wedding where the groom brought cannons. Inside the city, shopkeepers start evacuating. Rich families flee to the hills. Street dogs, unconcerned by international tensions, continue digging holes. And then, out of nowhere, you spotted a French Marine stumbling into your bakery. He's polite, sunburned, and clearly didn't get the memo about the whole war thing. He asks for a croissant. You stare at him like he just asked if you had extra bullets in stock. But you serve him anyway. It's muscle memory now. Merci, he says, then casually adds, we might start firing tomorrow. You nod slowly. Would you like that to go? Historians still argue whether France ever truly expected to collect the full amount, or if this was all a calculated flex of naval power. Some say it was a distraction from domestic unrest in France. Others say it was a test balloon for colonial ambition. Still others just mutter, you know the French, and trail off with a shrug. And you still haven't gotten your window replaced. The sun sets over Veracruz in ominous silence. French ships bob gently. The townsfolk brace. And you lie awake, staring at your bakery ceiling, thinking this is either going to end in laughter or fire. Spoiler, it's fire. Morning arrives like a slap from an old baguette stale, hard and aggressively unnecessary. The streets of Veracruz buzz with the nervous shuffle of people pretending they aren't preparing for bombardment. Horses trot with more anxiety than usual. Children whisper rumors about cannonballs the size of goats. And you, Joseph Remontel, wake up to discover your bakery's awning has been used as a makeshift army tarp by a group of teenage volunteers who definitely don't know how to hold rifles. Inside the government palace, President Anastasio Bustamante is pretending to be calm. But calm for a Mexican president in 1838 means hasn't staged or stopped a coup in 48 hours. He has war fatigue. He's been president 4 times, each tenure shorter and weirder than the last. He's surrounded by generals who smell like horses, brandy, and lightly burned tortillas. One whispers, should we negotiate? Bustamante sighs like a man who has stepped on yet another rake. They want how much? 600,000 pesos. For a tart? A chair too, sir. He closes his eyes. Meanwhile, France is done waiting. The 24-hour ultimatum has expired. Bowden raises his sword from the Hermione, dramatically, because of course he does. Somewhere in the distance, a pigeon gets startled and poops on a French ensign. The cannons open fire. Boom, boom, boom. You duck behind your bread oven, which turns out to be surprisingly effective cover, just another reason to trust cast iron. Windows shatter, dust flies, people scream. And in that chaos, someone kicks open your door and yells, "The French are attacking!" You yell back, "I know it's my fault." Veracruz is under siege. French shells pummel the harbor. The Mexican garrison fires back with rusty cannons, most of which are better at inspiring poems than hitting ships. Some explode on ignition. One just sort of coughs, rolls backward, and takes out a fruit cart. And then comes Santa Anna. Oh yes, you thought he was gone. But Mexico's favorite chaos goblin has returned limping, loud and thirstier for relevance than a forgotten pop star on a reunion tour. Here's your verified historical fact: Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, the one-legged general and former president twice, returned from political obscurity during the French bombardment to defend the homeland. Why? Because cannonballs are great PR. He arrives like a novella anti-hero, wind tousling his cloak, boots shining, saber already halfway unsheathed. His horse has a name like Vengeance or Margarita. His mustache is waxed. His prosthetic cork leg squeaks dramatically. A junior officer tries to salute and falls over. Santa Anna just points at the sky and bellows, "We shall throw the French into the sea like spoiled oysters." He's given immediate command of the defenses. Nobody really questions it. Why? Because no one else wants the job. Veracruz is being turned into flan. You poke your head out from the back of your shop and catch a glimpse of him rallying the troops. He waves his saber like he's directing traffic during an opera. "I want cannons on the left, I want rifles on the right, and someone fix my saddle. My dignity is off center." He may be a lunatic, but you've got to admit he makes war look stylish. Here's your bizarre trivia nugget. Santa Anna's cork prosthetic leg, imported from the US, became something of a celebrity during the siege. Soldiers believed it brought luck. One even kissed it before charging into battle, screaming for the sacred stump. And did it work? No. Santa Anna does manage to rally a few hundred men. They fire back, they scream, they die, they reposition cannons and argue over who gets to hold the shiniest sword. They have no chance against the French fleet, but damn it, they look dramatic doing it. Historians still argue whether Santa Anna actually made a difference during the defense of Veracruz, or if he just showed up, shouted theatrically, then left before the real fighting. One account claims he personally aimed a cannon. Another says he tripped on a goat and cursed Napoleon's ghost. The truth, as usual, lies somewhere between legend and lunacy. You try to stay out of it, but your bakery catches a stray cannonball right through the sign. Le Petit Remontel becomes Le Pay. You swear. You mourn the eclairs. Then you go outside and help haul water buckets to a burning stable, because if nothing else, you are now fully committed to this nonsense. At dusk, the French lower their guns. Veracruz smolders. Baudin sends a smug message to the Mexican government that was just a warning. Bustamante, bleary-eyed and covered in soot, writes back, "This is extortion." Santa Anna limps dramatically through the rubble, waves to the crowd, and declares victory even though the city is mostly on fire and smells like cooked horse. And you find your old complaint letter buried under ash. You blow the dust off and whisper, "This better be worth it." You wake up to the sound of church bells and seagulls fighting over a baguette, which feels ominously symbolic. Veracruz is charred and limping, like a drunk sailor after payday, but the French ship's still there, still bobbing smugly, like floating patisseries with cannons. The war, it seems, is just warming up. The French blockade tightens. Imagine this: no imports, no exports, no letters in, no chocolate out. It's like being grounded by your colonial dad. Baudin isn't content to just lob cannonballs at innocent adobe homes. Now he wants economic strangleholds. You, Poor Joseph Remontel. Have to grind your own flour and pray your eggs don't walk away. You try making pastries with cactus pulp. It does not go well. The city starves, but Bowden smiles. He's cut off Mexico from its Caribbean trade routes. He's got the whole coastline in a French chokehold. He renames his blockade maneuvers things like Operation Croissant Justice. You suspect he's doing this just to spite you. Here's your verified historical fact. Bowden's blockade extended all the way from the Yucatan to the Rio Grande, effectively paralyzing Mexico's coastal economy. This was not just about Veracruz. It was a full-on flex of French naval power across the entire Gulf Coast. And Mexico still not paying. Bustamante keeps sending grumpy diplomatic letters that say things like, "You bombed a sovereign nation over a PIE, and we didn't even eat the tart." But France remains unmoved. The pastries demand reparation. As the blockade drags on, locals begin smuggling goods through tiny fishing skiffs. Children become black market butter couriers. One 10-year-old girl becomes a legend after paddling through enemy waters with nothing but a crate of salted flour and an insultingly sarcastic note addressed to Baudin. "Here's your crusty dough, coward." Meanwhile, French sailors get bored, really bored. They weren't trained for occupation. They were trained to yell foe and pose dramatically. Now, they're stuck sunbathing on the deck, sweating through their uniforms and yelling insults at passing pelicans. And here's your bizarre trivia nugget. A French midshipman carved a bust of Napoleon entirely out of Mexican cheese and placed it at the bow of his ship. When it melted under the sun, they declared it a war crime and gave it a ceremonial sea burial. Eventually, some of the Marines are allowed to go ashore for supplies. Supplies, in this case, mean looting, again, because apparently the original bakery incident didn't teach anyone anything. You see them swagger into town, mustaches waxed, sabers gleaming, and absolutely zero clue how to ask for water in Spanish. They kick open tavern doors. They demand vin, then settle for pulque. They pay for nothing. Someone breaks into the town's museum and steals a jaguar mask. Another shouts "Vive la France" while accidentally sitting on a cactus. This doesn't endear them to the locals. Soon, Veracruz resistance takes a new form: petty sabotage. You hear rumors that someone replaced the French officer's shaving cream with goat butter. Someone else fills their boots with sand. A very bold baker, not you, for once allegedly fills eclairs with chili paste instead of cream and delivers them as a peace offering. 3 officers cry, 1 screams in betrayal. They declare it culinary terrorism. Historians still argue whether the sabotage during the blockade was spontaneous or coordinated. Some think local militias were quietly resisting the occupation through small-scale annoyance. Others believe the people were just tired, hot, and inventing new ways to make foreigners miserable. And you've entered your prophet in the wilderness phase. You start keeping a war diary titled La Guerre de ma Tart. You roam the ruins of your bakery like a ghost of pastries past. You teach local kids how to make crust using beans and sarcasm. One of them asks, "Is France winning?" You pause. You squint at the horizon. Well, you say they haven't gotten their money yet. Meanwhile, France is trying to save face. Paris newspapers report glorious victories, full of words like honor and discipline and crushed resistance. They do not mention the angry mob of Veracruz mothers who pelted French Marines with tamales after one of them insulted a church painting. Baudin, increasingly frustrated, starts pushing inland. He wants results. He wants treasure. He wants glory. Instead, he gets humid dysentery, cranky sailors, and letters from home asking when he plans to stop embarrassing France over a pastry. And somewhere in the chaos, someone remembers you. A local newspaper finally prints your name, Joseph Remontel, El Panadero de la Guerra, the baker of the war. You stare at the article, eyes wide, hand trembling. It's a terrible drawing. Your nose is too big and someone gave you a pirate hat, but still, you've become a symbol of vengeance, of absurdity, of flaky justice. You put the paper down and whisper, I should have just opened a tortilla stand. You squint at the ocean, and it squints back smug, salty, and full of floating Frenchmen with nothing better to do. The blockade continues like a bad house guest, loud, inconvenient, and impossible to remove without an international incident. You, Joseph Remontel, pastry prophet of Veracruz, are running out of sugar and patience in equal measure. The French have their ships, Mexico has stubbornness, and you have approximately 3 ounces of flour left and a spiritual migraine. Admiral Bawden, still basking in the righteousness of enforcing Tart justice, announces the next stage of the operation, tightening the noose. That means raiding smaller ports up and down the Gulf, slapping blockades on everything from Tampico to Campeche, like imperial Yelp reviews. Here's your verified historical fact. In addition to Veracruz, the French Navy expanded its blockade to encompass nearly every Mexican Gulf port, leading to a full halt in coastal trade and a devastating economic spiral in multiple cities. You'd think this would terrify the Mexican government into action. Nope. Instead, Santa Anna holds a press conference, which is really just him standing on a rock yelling at seagulls, where he declares that Mexico will never bow to croissants. He coins the term panny honor bread and honor. It catches on, mostly because it sounds like a bakery slogan, which confuses the hell out of you. Meanwhile, inside Veracruz, everything becomes scarcity theater. A single tomato now costs more than a musket. One woman trades her wedding veil for 2 eggs and a warm hug. You host illegal night bakes with salvaged dough and whisper recipes like contraband spells. Then, a French landing party marches through town strictly ceremonial. Baudin says, just a little stroll, a PR flex, 20 Marines, polished boots, feathered hats, looking like they escaped a circus that only performs for bored monarchs. They stop in the square, locals glare, children stick out their tongues, a parrot yells, "Go home" in Spanish. And then it happens, the ultimate insult. One of the Marines reaches into his coat and pulls out a fresh, golden pan au chocolat. He takes a slow, deliberate bite, eyes locked on a nearby group of starving townsfolk. A gasp ripples through the crowd. You nearly throw a brick. Instead, you throw a handful of unbaked crust dough. It hits his boot. The man looks down, then up at you. You wave. It's not a friendly wave. Tensions spike. But instead of violence, you get drama. A Mexican street performer starts composing satirical songs mocking the French, including one absolute banger titled La Baguette de la Muerte. Someone paints a mural of Santa Anna riding a taco into battle. It's majestic. It's anatomically confusing. It becomes an instant shrine. And here's your bizarre trivia nugget during this period. Local artists began referring to the blockade as La Guerra de las Galetas, the Biscuit War, not out of ignorance, but sheer spite. One Veracruz paper ran the headline, "They want our silver, but can't handle our salsa." Diplomatically, things spiral. Mexico tries to get other countries involved. Look, they yell to Britain. France is being insane again. Britain shrugs, drinks tea, and starts quietly sending observers. Historians still debate the extent of British involvement. Some suggest British naval officers subtly warned France to wrap it up. Others believe Britain was secretly delighted to watch its 2 colonial competitors slap each other like overdressed toddlers in a sandbox. And what of you? You, Joseph Remontel, now known locally as Senor Tartus, become an underground sensation. People ask to see the cannonball that hit your oven. You sell souvenir tart molds. You begin sketching out a one-man stage play titled The Dough That Launched 1,000 Ships. Nobody funds it. You perform it anyway. Meanwhile, the blockade continues to suffocate the region. French sailors grow meaner, sunburned, and increasingly weird. One officer begins insisting that Veracruz is haunted. Another claims to have seen Santa Anna riding a flaming iguana. Bowden, under pressure from Paris, escalates. He orders total enforcement. Any ship caught trading even with hand puppets is to be seized or sunk. You watch this unfold from your roof. You eat a sad, flourless cake made from chickpeas and rage. You wonder aloud, has anyone in history ever won a war this stupid? No one answers. But the parrot returns and squawks, croissant coward, and you choose to take it as a sign. Boom! Another French cannon barks across the harbor, sending a puff of white smoke into the sky and a chunk of iron into the crumbling walls of Veracruz. You, Joseph Remontel, duck instinctively behind what used to be a wine rack and now serves as both shelter and furniture. The city is being battered again, not symbolically, not diplomatically, literally battered like a festival churro. Bowden has lost patience. He's not writing letters anymore. He's not waiting for silver. He's gone full mustache-twirling colonial villain and decided that if Mexico won't pay for that damn tart, then Veracruz will... He brings in reinforcements. The Nereide, Ceres, and Didon, yes! Even their ships sound like 18th century soap opera characters sail into range. Every porthole is a gaping mouth, ready to spit fire. The French raise their colors. The Mexicans raise an eyebrow. And then the shells rain down. Here's your verified historical fact. On November 27, 1838, the French Navy bombarded Veracruz in earnest, targeting fortifications like San Juan de Ulua and effectively flattening large portions of the city. It was the bloodiest day of the entire war, which is not saying much because, again, this is still a war about dessert, but it was loud. San Juan de Ulua returns fire valiantly but hopelessly. The fort's cannons are outdated, half misfire. One collapses entirely, its barrel rolling into a street where it is quickly repurposed as a very efficient soup cauldron. You peek out from your shattered window. The port is smoke. The docks are rubble. The French are precise. No wild volleys here, just surgical strikes. Except the surgery is being performed by a drunk guy with a hammer. Someone screams. They hit the pigeon coop and a flock of furious birds darkens the sky. One French officer gets pooped on mid-order. You call it a divine counterattack. But even divine poop can't stop gunpowder. A warehouse explodes. A church bell rings midair as the steeple collapses. A bakery across from yours, La Concha de Oro, erupts in flames. You mutter amateurs under your breath and immediately feel guilty. People scatter, some fight, most hide. A few vendors keep selling things. One woman yells, 2 for 1 tortillas as her stall burns behind her. And then, oh no! Santa Anna shows up again. He appears like a one-man opera cloak flapping, saber aloft, eyes full of vengeance and melodrama. He rides into the shell fire on horseback, prosthetic leg wobbling like a rebellious baguette. Men cheer, women swoon, a dog bites his boot. He rallies what troops remain mostly local militia and 2 disgruntled tax collectors. He positions cannons, slaps one soldier for sneezing, and then makes a sweeping declaration. We shall fight them with honor, huevos, and fury. And here's your bizarre trivia nugget. Santa Anna actually coordinated a counterattack on horseback while wearing a cloak made from repurposed theater curtains. Apparently, they were the only fabric large enough to match his ego. A local seamstress later described it as half king, half sofa. Santa Anna orders a charge toward the shoreline. It's brave. It's also doomed. The French gunners are professionals. They reload fast. They aim well. One Mexican soldier manages to get within throwing range of a ship, lobs a coconut, and yells, "Viva Mexico!" before getting knocked unconscious by a falling chunk of roof. And then, like divine irony, descending from the heavens on a silver spoon, Santa Anna gets hit. A French shell bursts nearby. Shrapnel zips across the plaza. One jagged piece clips his leg, the real one, not the cork one. You watch as he topples from his horse, screaming, "Mi pierna otra vez, my leg again!" The man who once lost a leg to a cannon in Texas now watches his other leg get shredded by a French war crime over pastries. This man is either cursed or cosmically hilarious. Historians still argue about the exact nature of the injury. Some say it was a clean amputation. Others insist the leg was mostly intact but very angry. There's even a fringe theory that he faked it to make a point and add to his mythos. But we do know this Santa Anna demanded a formal parade in honor of his sacrifice. For both legs, one real, one cork. He is carried off the battlefield in dramatic silence, flanked by two crying violinists who definitely weren't there 5 minutes ago. Back in the harbor, French officers sip wine and congratulate themselves. Baudin declares that the honor of France has been defended. One sailor mutters over a tart and is quickly promoted. The bombardment slows. Veracruz lies cracked open like a piñata no one wanted to break in the first place. And you walk outside. Your shop is half ash, half miracle. Your old oven somehow still stands scorched, but proud. You kneel beside it, press your flour-dusted palm to its iron belly, and whisper, "We made it." Then you immediately cough, because the air is 30% gunpowder and 70% pigeon debris. That night, the fires crackle like drums. The city licks its wounds. The French stay offshore. Santa Anna gets put in a wagon with both his legs and none of his chill. And somewhere, deep in your soul, you begin to suspect that this isn't over. No, this is only the halfway point in the world's most violently unnecessary culinary feud. You know that sound your brain makes when it gives up trying to make sense of reality. That soft shh of logic evaporating like cheap mezcal in the sun. That's the soundtrack now. Because Santa Anna, yes, again is back. Again, this time, with fewer limbs and even more fanfare. Let's rewind slightly. After being struck in the leg, the real leg this time, because fate is apparently petty, Santa Anna did what any responsible general would do. He screamed dramatically, cursed France, and demanded to be carried from the battlefield like a one-legged phoenix in a military opera. Here's your verified historical fact. Santa Anna's leg was amputated, yes, again, after the bombardment of Veracruz. This meant that Mexico's most famous general was now officially double-legged in spirit, but single-legged in practice. Did this stop him from being the loudest man in the war? Absolutely not. While bedridden, he dictated an open letter to the citizens of the Mexican Republic, praising his own courage, his new sacrifice, and subtly implying that his leg was basically a holy relic. Somewhere in the mess of words was the suggestion that maybe someone should build a statue of his legs. Both of them, for balance. And that's not even the weirdest part. You're baking again. Sort of. You've reconstructed a corner of your bakery using salvaged bricks, melted forks, and a broken altar stone from the nearby chapel. You call it La Tartaria del Milagro. Nobody laughs. They're too tired. As you scrape burned crust off a pan with a bayonet, a kid runs up and shouts Santa Anna's throwing a leg parade. You freeze! What? A parade! For his leg. He's putting it in a carriage and marching it through town. You stare into the middle distance, then you mutter, of course he is. Because yes, he is. Here's your bizarre trivia nugget after the Pastry War. Santa Anna held a literal funeral procession for his amputated leg. He had it placed in a crystal coffin, paraded through Mexico City, and buried with full military honors, including speeches, cannon salutes, and mourning horses. Meanwhile, France watches from the coast, entirely unsure what's going on inland. Baudin asks his officers, are they worshipping a leg? Yes, sir. Do we respond? Sir. Baudin eventually shrugs and moves on to updating the blockade logistics. Veracruz is subdued, supplies are still low, and now the city is throwing festivals for appendages. He quietly decides not to invade further inland, possibly out of fear of what body parts might be next. Back in Veracruz, Santa Anna is a one-legged hero all over again. The people adore him, mostly because he's loud and confident, and not French. He gives speeches from his bed. Let the French tremble. Let them feel the wrath of Mexican valor and my ghost foot. Someone actually starts writing a ballad called La Pierna Inmortal. You do not attend the rehearsals. And yet, beneath all the theatrics, there's real tension. Because Mexico still hasn't paid, and France still hasn't left. The Mexican government is stuck between pride and poverty. They don't want to bow to French demands, but they also can't afford another bombardment. Bustamante starts sending frantic letters to other nations asking for help. Britain continues to sip tea and observe with passive-aggressive neutrality. The United States shrugs and goes back to annexing things. Diplomatically, it's a stalemate made of ego, salt, and baguettes. Historians still debate Santa Anna's actual role in the defense of Veracruz. Some say he was a genius of morale and national identity. Others claim he caused more problems than he solved. There's even one theory that says he staged the leg injury for sympathy, pointing to a suspiciously well-prepared crystal coffin. The debate rages on. The leg, notably, does not. And you've accidentally become part of the resistance. Your little rebuilt bakery becomes a meeting place for angry merchants, hungry soldiers, and deeply confused poets. You start naming your pastries after war heroes, El General Ganache, Churros de la Patria, the flaming tart of vengeance. They sell surprisingly well. One afternoon, a French sailor sneaks in during a supply run. He doesn't attack. He just sits quietly, orders something sweet, and says in broken Spanish, "This war is stupid." You nod, very. He finishes his tart, pays double, and walks out. You stare after him for a long time. Because deep down, you know something's shifting. The cannonballs have stopped for now. The air's quieter. But it's not peace. It's that awkward silence before the next argument. The kind of silence you get when someone says, "Let's talk," and you know no good pastry's coming out of it. The French are still on the coast. Santa Anna is still shouting, and you're still somehow at the center of the dumbest international incident since someone tried to crown a horse in Rome. You're elbow deep in experimental tamale batter when a cannon explodes 4 blocks away and someone yells, "They're loading the sausage again." You sigh. You put down the spoon. You walk outside. Because of course they are. Let's be clear, Veracruz has officially stopped pretending this war is normal. Nobody knows what's happening anymore. 1 week, it's artillery. The next, it's impromptu leg funerals. Now, it's sausage-based sabotage. You don't even ask questions anymore. You just follow the trail of pork and regret. What happened was, a French supply boat got overrun by a group of Mexican irregulars drunk, sunburned, and armed with a variety of weapons including a broken sword, a trumpet, and what appeared to be a sharpened oar. They raided the hold, found crates labeled Provisions European, and inside those crates, sausage, lots of it, fancy, oily, incredibly French sausage. One guy, no one knows who, but some claim his name was Pancho, and he was born during an eclipse, gets the idea, let's load this into a cannon and see what happens. Here's your bizarre trivia nugget. According to local legend and one poorly preserved sketch, Mexican fighters during the Pastry War actually loaded sausage into a small cannon and fired it at a French position. The impact was negligible. The confusion was astronomical. The sausage shell didn't kill anyone, but it ruined a uniform, struck a goat, and left one French officer screaming, "They're shooting food at us," in such a high-pitched voice that sailors teased him for a week. You, of course, are not involved, not directly, but one of the saboteurs was your former delivery boy, Carlos, who now calls himself El Chorizo Rojo. He comes into your bakery that night, wild-eyed and stinking of garlic. "Maestro," he says, "we made them fear the meat." You nod. You offer him a burnt concha. It's symbolic. Meanwhile, French morale is strained. The blockade drags on. Their officers are sunburned and bored. The soldiers are confused, tired, and covered in unsolicited tamale offers. One lieutenant writes in his journal, "This war has turned surreal. I dream of cheese but wake to chili." Another blames local weather for a rash that may or may not be punishment from an Aztec ghost. Here's your verified historical fact. By January 1839, French troops were suffering from tropical illnesses, inconsistent supplies, and a growing reluctance to press further inland. The Mexican resistance wasn't large, but it was spicy, unpredictable, and extremely annoying. You start noticing patterns. Every time the French attempt a raid or show of force, someone does something dumb and Mexican. A bell rings, a donkey brays, a firework explodes 3 days early. One night, a local saboteur team replaces French cannonballs with painted gourds. Another time, a small militia dresses as skeletons and parades down the beach shouting, "We're already dead! Give up!" The French respond by politely retreating half a kilometer. And then there's the sword fight. It happens outside the old cathedral at dusk. A French officer, Lieutenant something something, too many syllables, gets into a heated debate with a Mexican captain over who invented flan. The argument escalates from yelling to fencing in under 3 minutes. You and 30 others gather silently to watch. It's beautiful, ridiculous, a dance of honor and pudding-fueled rage. They duel for 6 minutes. One trips on a mango peel. The other gets distracted by a pigeon. Nobody dies. Everyone claps. Both men bow. Historians still argue about this duel. Was it real? Was it staged? One theory says it was actually a coded signal for a secret truce. Another claims it was just Tuesday in Veracruz. You believe it happened because you kept the pigeon feather that landed in your apron during round 2. Meanwhile, Santa Anna is healing loudly. He releases a public letter from bed, addressed to the glorious people and the glorious shadow of my leg. In it, he calls for total resistance, the formation of a national pastry guard, and, for some reason, a new national anthem written entirely in trumpet solos. You roll your eyes so hard you see your own skull. But the city listens. Resistance grows, not through massive armies or clever strategy, but through cumulative chaos, harassment, sarcasm, food-based warfare. The French, baffled and exhausted, begin withdrawing inland forces. They double down on the blockade, but fewer and fewer men want to leave their ships. every time they do, something stupid happens. One sailor swears he was hexed by a woman selling mangoes. Another returns with a love letter from a mysterious masked stranger who later turned out to be a raccoon. You can't make this up. Actually, you didn't make this up. This war is writing itself now. One evening, Carlos El Chorizo Rojo invites you to a strategy meeting. You decline. He begs. You attend. They sit in a candlelit room above a cantina, passing around a crude map of Veracruz drawn on a tortilla. The plan: confuse the French so badly they leave. You suggest handing them a bill for all the stolen pastries. Everyone applauds. At this point, confusion is your strongest weapon. And you are now its high priest. You are sweating through your apron and your sanity because French Marines are camped on the beach again, and nobody, including them, knows why. They're not attacking. They're not retreating. They're like overly armed flamingos, bored, sunburned, and vaguely hostile. You peer through the cracks in your half-melted shutters and see them roasting something suspiciously iguana-shaped over a fire. One is playing a flute. Another is shirtless and painting a very sad picture of a cactus. This is what a war looks like when it forgets it's a war. The French are bored. Really bored. And when professional invaders get bored, they do what all poorly supervised men with explosives tend to do: dumb, dangerous, time-consuming hobbies, like staging full-scale war games using goats as enemy troops, like fencing practice on the beach while blindfolded, like composing sea shanties about the pastry chef who started it all. Yes, they sing one every other night. You hear them drunkenly chant, "Oh, Joseph the baker, with tarts full of sin. We bombed half a port 'cause he lost his chin. Glass shards in his oven. Oh, such French despair. So we came with our ships, and we blocked all their air." They're not good at rhyming, but it stings. Here's your verified historical fact. As the French blockade dragged on into 1839, troop morale declined drastically. Long exposure to heat, illness, and inactivity caused frequent discipline issues and poor performance. Many French officers wrote home with complaints not about the Mexican military, but about their own boredom. And boredom is contagious. The Mexican side, equally confused, has settled into a rhythm of watch, wait, occasionally throw a rock. Veracruz militias no longer expect an invasion. They just want the French to stop existing nearby. No one is issuing orders. Half the soldiers have started selling handmade souvenirs to confused visitors. One guy hawks Santa Ana bobbleheads carved from coconut shells. You buy one, it wobbles indignantly. Meanwhile, inside your bakery, which now doubles as a meeting hall, underground theater, and psychiatric facility, you try to bake. You really do, but ingredients are scarce, and your clientele has become philosophical. "This war," says one, "eating a crusty lump of bread dipped in salsa, is like a dream I can't stop having." Another nods. "Except in this dream, there's too much cheese and somehow not enough." You serve them both sad empanadas and say nothing. And then come the iguanas. Here's your bizarre trivia nugget according to one dubious 19th century French travel journal. Marines stationed outside Veracruz tried to tame local iguanas for use as low-level reconnaissance units. This lasted approximately 36 minutes before the iguanas fled, bit several soldiers, and caused a brief panic that the reptiles were cursed by Aztec magic. You hear this story from a former French cook who defects and stumbles into your shop one night asking for shelter and anything resembling cheese. His name is Philippe. He looks like he hasn't slept in a week and smells like both wine and regret. "I joined to defend France," he whispers, "not to be chased by lizards in the jungle." You hand him a churro. He weeps. Even Santa Anna, who is still technically convalescing but emotionally thriving, begins to wonder what's happening. He issues a statement from his estate Reed Hammock calling for an end to the occupation of Mexican soil by buttered imperialists. It is unclear whether he means the French or actual butter. Historians still argue whether this phase of the war was tactical stalemate or just shared disinterest. Some say both sides were exhausted and quietly agreed to a mutual let's not policy. Others believe Baudin was hoping the psychological pressure of the blockade would cause Mexico to cave. Instead, Mexico just napped. And here's the kicker. This boredom is strategic, sort of. Because while France loiters on the coast, Mexico quietly starts rebuilding, smuggling resumes, traders sneak goods through the jungle. Even the post office starts delivering again, though most letters are just drawings of Santa Anna's legs doing battle against a croissant. The people, they adapt. A woman opens a food stand selling freedom fritters. A local band plays daily on the steps of the burned-out theater. Their most popular tune, Pastries of Pain. It's got a decent beat. You find yourself humming it while you clean soot off a rolling pin. And in your shop, your glorious, mismatched, mostly functional bakery, you find routine again. You bake, you serve, you gossip. French deserters sometimes wander in and pretend they're Spanish. You don't out them, you just charge them double. One day, a kid drops off a note written in elaborate calligraphy. It's from Baudin. It reads, "To the citizen known as Joseph Remontel, congratulations. You have become a symbol. Please stop encouraging the children to throw pastries at my men." You hang the letter above the stove. Because now it's official. You, the baker, are a weapon of war. Not with bullets, not with swords, but with tarts. You are staring at the sky, trying to will a cloud into looking like a croissant. When someone taps your shoulder and says, "The British are here," you blink. The what now? The British. Big ship. Weird flag. Smells like tea. You shuffle outside, apron stained with butter and smoke. And sure enough, there she is, a freshly scrubbed British sloop of war anchored politely just outside Cannonball range. No battle flags, no bristling anger, just vibes. Probably named something like HMS Sensible Disapproval. Within hours, a delegation lands, led by a man whose mustache is so precise it might be sentient. He wears a coat with more buttons than personality and introduces himself as Sir Basil Algernon Featherstone, the most British name to ever land on Mexican soil. Sir Basil's mission, diplomacy, mediation, polite awkwardness with a monocle. Here's your verified historical fact the British did. In fact, play a diplomatic role in ending the Pastry War, concerned about trade disruption in the Gulf and French overreach. Britain sent envoys to help mediate peace between France and Mexico. They didn't fire a shot, they just talked slowly until people got tired. Sir Basil requests a meeting with both sides. Baudin agrees, instantly probably relieved to have someone new to complain to. The Mexican government, cautious but curious, sends a delegate named Lopez who arrives in sandals and brings tamales instead of documents. They meet aboard a neutral ship, sitting in stiff chairs and drinking tea hot enough to cauterize bad intentions. The conversation is tense. France still demands 600,000 pesos. Mexico still offers precisely 0 pesos and a heartfelt middle finger. Sir Basil tries to bridge the gap. "What if," he says gently, "Mexico pays some of it?" None Lopez insists. That tart wasn't even that good. Baudin bristles. "We lost a mustache, Major. He was hit by a brick shaped like a flan." Sir Basil sighs. "This is going to take a while." Back in Veracruz, you watch the scene unfold like a soap opera with subtitles in Latin and passive aggression. You serve your morning pastries with a side of updates from Carlos, who now calls himself your covert flan formation agent. "So, the British want peace," he says, mouthful of spicy bun. You nod, that tracks. "They brought real biscuits. I saw a sailor trade one for a bottle of mole." "God save the Queen," you mutter sincerely. Meanwhile, the French Marines begin sprucing up camp. They've been told to behave. Suddenly, the beaches are tidier. Sabers get polished. There's a brief phase where everyone pretends to care about posture. It lasts 2 days. Here's your bizarre trivia nugget. British sailors reportedly handed out tea bags and pickled onions to both sides as goodwill offerings. The Mexicans were suspicious. The French were offended. One man mistook the pickled onions for eyeballs and fainted. And then something truly unexpected happens. Diplomacy starts working. Not quickly, not well, but somehow, by sheer volume of politeness and mutual exhaustion. Negotiations creep forward. Britain offers to guarantee the eventual payment of reparations, just not the ridiculous full amount. Mexico agrees, grudgingly, to pay something. France pouts, but Baudin is out of fresh shirts and patience. Historians still argue who really made the breakthrough. Some say it was Sir Basil's gentle persistence. Others say it was just that everyone involved wanted to go home. One theory insists it was a bribe of imported British gin that finally loosened the French ego. No records confirm it, but a suspiciously tipsy Baudin gave his first cheerful speech that same evening. And while world powers are brokering the end of Desertageddon, you're rehearsing a puppet play titled The Crumble of Empire. You've built marionettes of Baden made of sausage, Santa Anna with detachable legs, and a giant tart with googly eyes. The kids love it. The adults love it more. That night, word spreads a ceasefire is imminent. No more cannon fire, no more blockades, no more patrols screaming "Vive la patisserie" while slipping on tamale wrappers. Carlos runs into your shop, waving a leaflet. They say France is leaving soon. You blink. Really? Really, and we didn't even have to pay the full $600,000. You lean against the oven, let out a long sigh, and whisper, "I'm gonna bake something ridiculous." You stay up all night. Flour in your hair, fire in your soul. You construct a monument in pastry, form a 12-tier tart, glazed with defiance and frosted with absurdity. At the top, a tiny marzipan admiral holding a cannonball in one hand and a broken teacup in the other. You name it, the Treaty of Sweet Surrender. The French never taste it, but the townsfolk cheer. You feel victorious. Not because anyone really won, but because this stupid war might finally be over. And then, just as the final cannon cools, just as your oven regains purpose, just as the marzipan tribute to international idiocy starts to settle in the sun, someone asks the question, "Wait, why were we fighting again?" You drop your piping bag mid-squiggle. Across the room, a former French Marine turned bread enthusiast pauses mid-baguette. Carlos blinks so hard he forgets which leg Santa Anna lost. Because the truth is, no one remembers. Not really. The treaty is being drafted. British scribes are working furiously. Sir Basil Featherstone is carefully sipping his 11th cup of tea. The French are packing up their things. Mexico is pretending this was all part of a long-term tactical strategy. And yet, amid all this almost peace, nobody seems entirely sure why this whole mess started in the first place. So let's review. A French pastry chef's bakery was damaged. He asked for 600 pesos. France asked for 600,000 pesos. Mexico said no. France blockaded an entire coastline and bombarded a city. Santa Anna lost another leg. Sausages were fired from cannons. A leg was buried with military honors. Britain showed up and politely de-escalated the whole thing. The baker, the U in this story, accidentally became a national symbol of vengeance pastry. Somewhere along the way, the point was lost. You hear rumors now, wild, wonderful, dumb rumors. One guy swears the war was about a stolen hat. Another claims it was revenge for a Frenchman being denied churros at a wedding. There's even a theory that France mistook Veracruz for a different city entirely and were too proud to admit it. Here's your verified historical fact. Although the war's name, the Pastry War, derives from Remontel's bakery claim, France bundled numerous grievances from various French citizens living in Mexico. These included claims for damaged businesses, unpaid debts, and property seizures. But the pastry story, that was the public hook, the catchy, flaky center of a much messier imperial crust. And you, Joseph Remontel, are now immortalized as the man who started it all. Not officially, of course. There's no statue, no monument, but people know your name. Soldiers shout it during card games. Kids sketch your mustache in the dirt. Even Santa Anna references you in a bizarre speech where he says, "And I say to France, if you come for our tarts, we shall come for your pride." Here's your bizarre trivia nugget in the aftermath of the war. A traveling French puppeteer put on a stage show titled Le Grand Tart Tragedy, featuring a puppet version of you being struck by lightning, betrayed by his oven, and eventually marrying a churro princess. It ran for 37 nights in Marseille. You received no royalties, but the confusion only grows. France issues a victory statement that includes the line, "Honor restored. The Treaty of Recompense proves our strength." Mexico, meanwhile, publishes its own version saying, "Our homeland shall not kneel to flaky threats. Neither side agrees on what was agreed upon." Historians still argue if this war was about justice, trade, or just an excuse for France to show off its navy. Some point to deeper tensions, Mexico's shaky government, France's imperial mood, Britain's quiet meddling. Others shrug and say it was just about the tart. You overhear two French sailors arguing. "It was about unpaid debts," one says. "No," says the other, "it was revenge for that insult at the wine merchant's party." They stop. "Wait, what did we bomb again?" "Dunno, but the iguanas were cursed. Man." Back in your bakery now, fully rebuilt, reinforced with bricks, prayers, and leftover cannon, parts you host a war is probably over party. Everyone's invited, even the French, especially the British. There's a new menu, of course. Treaty tarts filled with something vaguely diplomatic. Siege biscuits hard enough to break teeth and spirits. Chorizo de la Resistencia, only slightly illegal. And a cake shaped like Santa Anna's leg with marzipan stump detailing. People laugh. People cry. Someone sings a song titled "The Tart That Tamed Two Nations." You stand behind the counter, hands dusted in sugar, heart full of something halfway between pride and permanent confusion. Because this war, this ridiculous pastry-fueled, leg-losing, biscuit-blockading war is winding down, not with a bang, but with an exhausted shrug and a silent agreement to never talk about this again. So here you are, standing in a freshly whitewashed bakery, frosting a cake shaped like a cannon, listening to the faint echo of a British tea kettle boiling aboard a distant diplomatic vessel. The war is ending, probably, but not before both nations plunge into one last round of fiscal theater. Because now the fighting's over, the cannonballs have stopped flying, and people can finally return to the true battlefield paperwork. France wants its money, officially, formally, elegantly. Mexico wants it all to disappear like a fart in the wind. Here's your verified historical fact. In March 1839, under pressure from Britain, Mexico agreed to pay the requested reparations, but only after extensive negotiation reduced the terms to a more manageable amount. The final figure was not the original 600,000 pesos, and Mexico insisted on a delayed payment schedule backed by British financial guarantees. You hear all this secondhand from Carlos, who has now rebranded as a military baker strategist historian. He walks into your shop holding a folded newspaper and a single egg, which he presents like a diplomatic offering. They say the payment will go through London, he says, panting from excitement or maybe just uphill running. It's all being mediated by a British bank. So the French get money, but not from us. Sort of. From us, but slowly, with British supervision and conditions and weird stamps. You nod, stirring your latest dough, just like a wedding divorce. But the chaos isn't quite over yet. Because money is one thing, but pride is sticky, like burnt caramel. France wants recognition, Mexico wants to forget, and both countries are deeply invested in winning the post-war narrative. Which is why, suddenly, every town square in Mexico has a guy standing on a crate yelling things like, "It was never about the pastry, it was about sovereignty," and French newspapers print cartoons of Baudin heroically slapping a flan out of Emperor Napoleon's hand while shouting. For France, you watch in stunned amusement as the narrative becomes performance art. Here's your bizarre trivia nugget. One French satirical journal depicted the war as a love triangle between a baguette, a sombrero, and a leg. The caption read, "She chose violence," and a cork foot. Even Santa Anna joins the pageantry. Of course he does, by unveiling a new plan, a national monument to resistance. His proposal, a statue of himself, mounted on a pastry pedestal, waving a sword made of pure silver. You attend the proposal ceremony out of morbid curiosity. He's seated on a velvet throne with one leg elegantly crossed over the other well, prosthetic cork over thigh, and he announces, "Let this monument remind future generations that not even the most ridiculous enemy can defeat a nation with spirit, sauce, and self-delusion." Applause! Confetti! A pigeon explodes on contact with a sparkler. You're asked to bake the model for the statue and cake first. You agree, then make it anatomically absurd out of spite. Meanwhile, the reparations debate continues. Britain appoints a reparations monitor, a man so gray and serious that children believe he turns to stone at night. His job to watch Mexico try to pay France slowly, reluctantly, while France keeps asking for updated invoices and Mexico keeps misplacing silver. Historians still argue if Mexico ever fully paid what was promised. Some say yes eventually, others say only partial payments were ever made, and the rest vanished into bureaucratic sinkholes. One theory suggests that by 1841, France simply gave up collecting and called it a national lesson in not overreacting to desserts. And you begin writing a book. It's part memoir, part cookbook, part fever dream. Tentative title, How I Accidentally Started a War Recipes for Revolution and Rhubarb Tart. The preface simply reads, "I wanted a new window. They gave me a naval blockade." You test chapters aloud in your shop. Chapter 3, you recite one evening, in which I witness the firing of a cured meat from a rusty cannon and consider the viability of war by Delhi. A customer claps. Carlos weeps. The French finally begin loading up their last crates. The Marines pack up tents. A brass band plays a confused rendition of La Marseillaise mixed with local folk music. The final French officer tips his hat to you as he boards the boat. No hard feelings. Monsieur Tart, he says, then accidentally steps in a mole poblano. You take that as closure. With the last ships on the horizon, the townsfolk begin rebuilding. Children go back to stealing fruit. Couples return to dramatically breaking up in public plazas. The local parrot, now fluent in both insults and minor legal terms, becomes an honorary notary. And one evening, as you sweep your bakery floor, you realize something. This war, this nonsense, this flaming, flan-fueled fever dream, it's part of you now. You lean out your window and shout, "Does anyone actually know what we paid for?" Someone yells back, "Maybe a chair and some dignity." Another voice, and a guy named Philippe who got iguana rash. You smile. You don't need answers. You have your oven. You have your tart. You have your legend. You're kneading dough with the ferocity of a man who's survived a war and still isn't sure if it was a metaphor when the door to your bakery flies open and a street urchin screams, "Santa Anna got shot in the butt." You drop the bowl. Carlos, who's now basically just always here, spits out a churro and yells, "Which butt?" "The real one," the kid replies, before cartwheeling away like a messenger from Olympus. And thus begins the next national chapter in Mexico's long-running series, A Tale of Legs and Asses. Here's your verified historical fact. In 1842, just a few years after the Pastry War, Santa Anna was indeed wounded in the posterior during yet another round of military conflict. While not technically part of the Pastry War, this injury became intimately tied to his wartime mythos and remains a golden nugget of military comedy. Back in Veracruz, the war might be over, but Santa Anna's reputation is like a roach in the kitchen, bulletproof, irritating, and too theatrical to die quietly. The story spreads instantly. He was reviewing troops. He was mounting a horse. He was talking to a mirror when, bang, he sits down screaming "Viva!" and gets shot in the national dignity. You don't care about the facts anymore. You're already frosting a commemorative cupcake shaped like a glute. Carlos suggests adding red jelly filling for historical realism. You stare at him for a moment too long. And then you do it. Here's your bizarre trivia nugget after being shot in the butt. Santa Anna reportedly declared the incident a minor inconvenience in the noble march of Mexico's destiny. His generals tried not to laugh. One failed and was reassigned to iguana duty. The people, however, go wild. Within days, street vendors in multiple cities are selling butt bullets. Chocolate truffles molded like musket rounds. They come with little edible flags and optional chili centers. Ballads are composed again. One chorus goes, "2 legs he's lost, 1 butt he's bruised, but still he fights, still we're confused." Santa Anna, naturally, leans into the moment. He writes a public letter titled "A Scar for the Nation," in which he declares that the bullet passed near his most patriotic muscle. He insists it is proof that no part of him, no matter how humble, is safe from foreign tyranny. You snort so hard mid-read you nearly choke on a sugar-dusted concha. But here's the twist somehow. This injury helps him. His legend grows. Again, he limps more dramatically. He makes jokes at official events. He asks foreign dignitaries to kindly stand. Since I cannot... Historians still argue whether this moment, this glorious gluteal humiliation, was a turning point in Mexican popular mythology. Some say it marked Santa Anna's full transformation into a living caricature of the nation's resilience. Others argue it was the beginning of his final act of self-parody. One thing's for sure, never before has an ass played such a pivotal role in foreign policy. Meanwhile, your bakery is booming. You name your latest treat Los Caches de la Libertad Freedom Cheeks. They're soft, round, and filled with cream and defiance. They sell out within the hour. You even stage a reenactment of the butt shooting using pastries. It's a wildly successful puppet show that ends with Santa Anna's icing-covered marzipan double being hoisted into the air on a candy stretcher. Bowden, if he's still listening from across the sea, must be questioning every decision he's ever made. And as for you, you've fully accepted your role in this pantomime of history. You're no longer just a baker. You're a cultural landmark. You're the flavor behind the feud, the flaky foundation of a geopolitical farce. Your receipts may not be taught in textbooks, but your sugar sculptures now hang in the local museum next to broken French cannon fragments and one suspiciously intact cork leg. One afternoon, a French tourist wanders into your shop, polite, nervous, possibly lost. He speaks in halting Spanish. Are you the Tart man? You nod slowly. He bows. On behalf of my country, we're sorry, that was excessive. You hand him a tart. It's on the house, you say, but don't ever touch the windows. The French have left, the cannons have cooled, the ships have sailed, the smoke has cleared, and yet Veracruz still smells faintly of pastry and unresolved trauma. The Pastry War is over, but no one seems quite sure who won. France. They didn't get their full money, never got their apology soufflé, and lost a great deal of dignity somewhere between the blockade and the accidental sausage attack. Mexico! They didn't technically win the war, but they're celebrating like they did. Street murals of Santa Anna's leg now feature a golden glow. Children dress up as exploding tarts for national holidays. One small town tries to rename itself Leg Town. The paperwork is still pending. And you, Joseph Remontel, the original tart victim, how are you feeling? Like a man who watched the world burn over a flan. Here's your verified historical fact. Despite the damage and diplomatic fallout, the Pastry War had relatively low casualties, but the economic consequences for Mexico were significant, and it marked one of the first times European imperialism would use minor civilian grievances to justify military intervention in Latin America, a pattern that tragically would repeat again. But in Veracruz, history is already being remixed. A poet from Oaxaca pens a tragic sonnet about the man who baked and bled. It's about you. It's terrible. You hang it in the bathroom. Santa Anna is spotted once again in uniform, being carried around like a sacred scroll. This time he's claiming he plans to restore national honor through equine ballet. No one knows what that means, and no one wants to. Carlos now runs a food truck called Tactical Tamales. Its slogan is fried in freedom, seasoned in chaos. And your bakery, oh, it's thriving. The new menu includes treaty tarts burned on the outside, sweetly conditional inside. Ceasefire croissants flaky, overpriced, delivered slowly. Bite of Bowden, a small, unsatisfying eclair that costs 600,000 pesos as a joke. There's also a mural across the street of you, holding a flaming pie in one hand and a treaty in the other. Someone added laser beams to your eyes. You let it happen. And yet, amid all the baked glory and confused patriotism, there's an air of unfinished business. Because the question still looms. What did any of this actually solve? Sure, France proved it could throw a tantrum with ships. Mexico proved it could survive one with sarcasm. Britain proved it could show up late, sip tea, and leave with a pat on the back. But that original problem, the broken bakery window, the drunk soldiers, the flung mille-feuille, that was never really addressed. No court case, no apology, no formal reimbursement. Historians still argue whether your specific claim was ever settled. Some say you received hush money from the French consul. Others say you never saw a peso and wrote "This war owes me rent" on every tart box for the rest of your life. The truth, somewhere between the sugar and the shame. Here's your bizarre trivia nugget decades later. A scholar researching French-Mexican relations found your name in a dusty Parisian archive labeled Incidents, Unsettled Pastry Hostilities. It was wedged between spilled wine dispute, Havana and goat theft, Guadeloupe. As absurd as it all seems, the Pastry War leaves a real legacy. It teaches world powers a dangerous lesson that minor civilian complaints can be inflated into colonial justification. It sets a precedent for gunboat diplomacy, and it gives Santa Anna yet another excuse to claim martyrdom, because if there's one thing the man collects, it's limbs and legacies. But you just wanted your window fixed. Instead, you got a war, a legend, a museum exhibit, 3 ruined ovens, and a song written by drunk sailors about your eclairs. One evening, you sit out front with a cup of spiced chocolate, staring at the harbor. It's quiet now. The birds have returned. The air smells like salt, bread, and something unspoken. Carlos sits beside you. "Think it'll happen again?" he asks. You shrug. Probably. People are idiots. Do you regret it? You sip. No, you say, but next time I'm charging double. And the two of you sit there, watching the sun set behind the distant outline of what might be a returning British ship, or maybe just a very confused fishing boat. Either way, you know this, you were just a baker. And now, you're a veteran of the dumbest war in modern history. It's quiet now. Not ominous, not the kind of quiet that precedes a cannonball, or a declaration, or a confused British sloop humming "God Save the Queen" off key. No, this is real, deep, honest to flan silence. Veracruz breathes again. The cobblestones no longer rattle with gunfire. The seagulls no longer dive bomb French sailors for fun. Well, not as often. The war is over. But your story, it lingers. You've become something more than a man, more than a baker, more than even the glorious, ash-smudged, frosting-covered icon you see in your bakery mirror each morning. You're a myth now. Every student in Veracruz knows your name. The phrase, "don't pull a Remontel," is local slang for accidentally starting something huge with something stupid. There's a children's card game called Panny Plomo Bread and Lead, where the goal is to outlast your enemies using pastry-based attacks and vaguely European insults. There's even a tavern named after you now, El Panadero de Guerra. It serves your recipes, plays live reenactments of the war every Friday, puppets, naturally, and sells a drink called the Cork Commander Rum. Sugar, lime, and just a hint of gunpowder smoke. It tastes like absurdity and pride. You try to stay humble, but it's hard when your face is literally etched onto chocolate coins. Here's your verified historical fact after the Pastry War ended. Joseph Remontel largely disappeared from the historical record. His claim was absorbed into larger compensation negotiations, but his name persisted in local lore. Some say he moved back to France, others that he died in Veracruz with a rolling pin in hand. His bakery site became a minor tourist destination for decades. But what matters isn't how you ended, it's what you started. You sparked a ridiculous flame in the soggy crust of history, and that flame spread until it became artillery. You were the dough that rose into revolt. You were the man who reminded two nations that yes, even pastry can be political. Even sugar can draw blood. Even a tart, yes, a silly, flaky, overpriced tart can rewrite treaties. Here's your bizarre trivia nugget. In 1978, a French diplomat visiting Mexico was handed a tart at a ceremonial reception. As a joke, it came with a tiny paper flag that read, "Truce." The diplomat laughed for 6 full minutes and nearly choked. He later called it the best diplomatic dessert I've ever received. And Santa Anna, he reappears again, Obviously, how could he not? He's president of Mexico again. For the 6th, 7th, who's counting by now, he's mostly prosthetic, entirely theatrical, and borderline immortal. Some say he's building a shrine to his leg made entirely of dried mango and bronze. You catch a glimpse of him once. He rides by in a carriage that smells like perfume and powdered sugar, waving both majestically and incorrectly at everyone. A child yells, "Show us your butt scar," and he waves harder. You don't wave back, you just nod. 2 warriors, 1 tart, no closure. The French, of course, do what the French always do. They move on, pretend it never happened, and quietly mark it as a mild colonial success. It becomes a footnote in their foreign policy scroll. Pastry War, outcome complicated, delicious. Historians still argue about it. Some say it was the first modern example of economic gunboat diplomacy. Others call it a case study in colonial arrogance. A few brave souls label it what it really was, the world's dumbest war. And you keep baking, because in the end, the world keeps spinning. Flags change, leaders rise, treaties dissolve. But pastry endures. Flaky, imperfect, and too stubborn to collapse. Just like you. It's over now. The cannons are silent. The ships have long since faded into the horizon. No more sabers rattling over desserts. No more flaming tarts fired in fury. The smoke has lifted. The bread has cooled. And all that remains is the slow, steady hum of a city remembering how to sleep again. You're safe. Your windows may be cracked, your rolling pins splintered, but your hands are steady now. The oven is warm. The sky no longer echoes with confusion and powdered rage. You made it through. This tale, absurd as it was, has come to rest. There are no more battles tonight, no more bureaucrats shouting about chairs, no admirals pounding tables over sugar, just a quiet bakery lit by soft lamplight where stories turn back into dough. So breathe. Let the past settle like dust on a cooling tray. Let the war slip gently into legend, where it belongs, between the pages of forgotten letters, beneath the icing of satire. Tonight, you sleep, not as a soldier, or a martyr, or a myth, just as you, the baker, the man who endured. The one who stood firm while empires threw tantrums and cannonballs at each other over a dessert. The moon is high now. The kitchen is clean. The night is yours. Rest easy, friend. The pastry has been avenged.